Okay, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into a major shakeup happening over at the National Institutes of Health. Based on some really eye-opening reporting from Science magazine back in August of 2026, we're looking at a developing story that is literally sending ripples through the American scientific community. Our goal with this explainer is to just unpack the facts, step by step, so you can understand exactly what's shifting at the nation's premier health research agency.
To keep things structured, here is how we're going to break this down. First up, a controversial NIH appointment. Then, we'll do a quick resume check, followed by a look at ties outside the mainstream. After that, we'll zoom out to a broader leadership pattern and wrap it all up with why this matters.
So, starting right off with Section 1, a controversial NIH appointment, a new NICHD director.
Science magazine reports that Dr. John Gaetanis, who is a pediatric neurologist, has just been appointed to helm the NIH's Child Health Institute. That's officially known as the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD for short. He officially steps into this role on August 23, 2026. Now, this move is sparking some serious conversations and concern among scientific veterans. Why? Well, according to the reporting, this appointment is raising major questions about the selection process under the current administration of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., and whether political alignment is taking the front seat over traditional scientific qualifications. To put the sheer scale of this responsibility into perspective, just take a look at this number. $1.7 billion. That is the massive annual budget of the NICHD that Dr. Gaetanis is now going to oversee. We're not just talking about a small advisory committee here. This is the management of a colossal infrastructure, directing taxpayer money toward absolutely critical research on child health, maternal health, and human development.
And it's not just the money. He's also going to be managing an institute with 1,100 employees. This number alone immediately establishes the high stakes, The director is responsible for leading this huge workforce of scientists, administrators, and policy experts who really depend on steady, experienced leadership to execute the Institute's incredibly complex mission.
Which brings us to Section 2, the resume check, clinical versus research.
When you look at his professional background, it highlights this really fascinating juxtaposition. On the one hand, you've got a very strong traditional clinical background. He's got an MD from Brown, training at Harvard hospitals, and stints heading pediatric neurology divisions at both Brown and Tufts. He was at Hasbro Children's Hospital up until July 2025, and he has published clinical research on epilepsy and autism. But juxtapose that with his NIH experience. According to the NIH's own database, there is absolutely zero evidence that he has ever received research funding from the agency. There's also no record of him serving as an outside peer reviewer for agency grants, and stepping up to run a $1.7 billion institute with no prior footprint in the NIH funding ecosystem, that's highly unusual. This leap from clinical practice straight to top-tier research administration definitely caught the attention of his peers. Former colleague Dr. Phyllis Dannery, she's the medical director at Hasbro Children's Hospital, expressed surprise at the appointment. She pointed out that his strengths were very much clinical, not research-based, especially given that lack of NIH funding we just talked about. The article also notes her observation that Dr. Gaetanis was sought out by patients specifically looking for alternative therapies, which kind of hints at his unconventional approaches. Let's look a bit closer at that in Section 3, outside the mainstream, unconventional ties. Science magazine maps out a few professional affiliations that place Dr. Gaetanis pretty distinctly outside the mainstream scientific consensus. For instance, he serves on the board of the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs. That's a group promoting alternative treatments for autism, things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. He's also worked as a paid expert witness in federal court for families claiming neurological harm from childhood vaccines. On top of that, he's seemingly embraced the Make America Healthy Again, or MHA, agenda, having attended a related autism event back in September 2025. Actually, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. even tried to name him to the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee previously. An offer Gaetanis only declined because of prior professional obligations.
And it really boils down to this exact combination of factors for the traditional scientific community. Unconventional views mixed with a lack of administrative research experience. David Mandel, an autism researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, summed up the core anxiety among NIH staffers perfectly. He pointed out the sheer vastness of the resources Gaetanis will now control, juxtaposed directly with a total lack of experience within the very institute he's being tasked to lead.
Now let's zoom out to Section 4, a broader leadership pattern, broader NIH changes. When we map out the recent pattern of NIH leadership changes, a really clear shift starts to emerge. While earlier picks this year were more conventional, this latest slate looks totally different. Right below Gaetanis is Dorothy Fink, the new NICHD deputy director. She's connected to Kennedy and actually oversaw a massive communications pause in 2025 that ended up canceling dozens of grant review meetings. Then you have Stephen Quay, who is reportedly slated to direct the NIID. Much like Gaetanis, Quay has zero NIH funding history, but he is a vocal proponent of the disputed COVID-19 lab leak theory and reportedly won Kennedy's backing over standard staff recommendations. Finally, the former chief of the Environmental Health Institute was just replaced by a friend of Vice President J.D. Vance. The reporting here suggests a very clear pivot, prioritizing political connections and alternative scientific viewpoints over traditional NIH research and grant management experience.
Which brings us to our final section, why this matters. The future of the NIH.
Jeremy Berg, who as a former NIH Institute director himself, really encapsulates the scientific community's grave concern here. The fear isn't just about debating different scientific philosophies, it's about a structural threat to the entire agency. He notes there is clear evidence that these selections are based on political views, raising a huge red flag that handing over billion-dollar budgets to individuals who might lack a rudimentary understanding of how the NIH actually works could, in his view, destabilize the whole system.
So, looking at all this reporting, we are left with a pretty profound question. When the levers of a multi-billion-dollar research infrastructure are handed over to leaders whose backgrounds sit entirely outside the historical mainstream, how will these funds be directed in the years to come? Are we going to see innovative breakthroughs from shaking up the establishment, or will this dismantle the traditional peer-reviewed foundations of American biomedical science? That is the defining question we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and we'll see where this story goes next.